I do not think that the ACP is a major problem for the socialist left today. They could join in with the campaign and pocket the ideology and actually just do the work that everybody wants to do, that you want to do, that the Maoists want to do, the Stalinists want to do, the pro-American wacko Trotskyists want to do, meaning, Chris Catrone and the Platts, and all variety of other groups want to do this kind of civil society organizing now.
The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
Stop. Hold on. Stop.
No, I'm gonna introduce you. David McKerracher is with me today on Diet Soap. He's a head of Theory Underground. He's written books such as Time Energy, While You Have No Time Energy. He's also co-edited the anthology Underground Theory. He was on the panel with me in Chicago. I've known him since he was a wee lad, and I'm glad to have him back on the podcast.
Thanks, Doug. Great to be here again. Always a good time.
Sorry,
nice introduction. Yeah.
All right.
I was like, don't do it. I was like, don't do it, just because once you get tongue tied, it spirals from there, So
no, I did it though. I'm a professional. I'm a pro.
Yeah, you nailed it.
All right. I nailed it. We'll do it live. All right. So, David, I'm glad to talk to you. I have been hearing more and more about your project lately, since Chicago and before. I've been on your podcast recently. You've been engaging with Chris Catrone. You and I we share a co-host. Benjamin Studebaker is on both of our channels. And I am interested to try to figure out why you consider yourself to be post-left or beyond left and right. And what is the theory in Theory Underground about?
That's a great question. Yeah, thank you. Well, and I want to say to everybody, I did not prepare anything for this. I just kind of figured, since I didn't know until like right beforehand, I was like, it'll be fine. We'll just talk about whatever. But theory, I want to kind of start with that, because I kind of hate the term. I think it kind of gets everything off on the wrong foot, because it makes people who are less dialectical kind of just assume it's not practical. You know what I mean? Of course, if you're more dialectical, you're thinking there is no such thing as theory without practice. But also, I don't like people thinking that the stuff they do on the internet is practice, right? Like, it kind of can be, but it's complicated, right? And so I think one of the interests that we share is getting out there in the world and actually doing stuff with people, not just staying online. And so saying all that up front, the other issues with the term theory is, let's see, literary criticism is the inroad for most people, if not debate club or a debate team at their high school or college. And so that in that case, people are using theory for sophistry, right? They're using it to prepare their debate brief, right? Like they're saying, oh, well, if someone argues this, then I can say, well, Baudrillard said that. And so, that creates a problem for people trying to come from a more either political or philosophical approach, right? And so for me, theory is political, it is philosophical, and it's something that's supposed to be used to try to understand the situation. And I typically say, the way I think about it and the way I'll tell my students about it is like, there's two kinds of theory. If we're going to be very broad and generalizing here, like there's two kinds of theory. There's a kind of theory that says what must be done. So it's usually it's kind of an approach that, Lenin obviously comes to mind. So it's a political theory that has a prescription for a diagnosis of the situation, versus a different kind of theory that says, well, that didn't work, so now what? And when I got into it, I think it was a lot more what needs to be done. And I kind of had some sort of a sense, because I was some kind of a vague libertarian leftist, right? Fusionist, vague leftist. And I say libertarian because like originally, like my first point of entry, like the first person I ever took seriously was Ron Paul, just because I came into YouTube and stuff like that around the time that people I knew were sharing stuff. And I was like, I like his approach. It sounds like I could still have conversations with Democrats and Republicans and relate to them. And so from the beginning, I've liked something that's against the establishment, trying to pave a way forward, that doesn't make it so that you have to cut off one half of the country or one quarter of the country, right? And so, I mean, that was what I liked about him at the time. I didn't really understand the whole Federal Reserve thing and the being upset about fiat currency, though I would say it. You know, I was like, oh, well, that's the problem. We're not on the gold standard. But I didn't really do economics. I was just kind of parroting whatever I was learning back then. And then, you know, in college, I was a non-traditional student, and I got into Marx at some point. And then later on, I got into Bernie, and I would have just been considered some kind of a dirtbag class reductionist. Up until after the 2016 election, I felt bad for being a Bernie bro. Tried for a couple of years to work with radlibs, and learned how futile that can be. And then I worked more with Marxists after that. And so all of that to say, I feel like, you know, I've been all over the place, and the kind of theory that has appealed to me since 2020 and the burnout that I experienced is definitely the second kind that I was indicating, which is the more like, okay, well, that's not working. So what now?
Well, the reason I asked is why theory and theory underground is because I was wondering if it was a reference to critical theory. To critical theory?
Yeah, it's related. Yeah, for sure. Because critical theory is often what needs to be done, or that did not work. So now what? Or why did that not work? Right? Would you say?
Yeah. Well, I you know, look, from my perspective, the way critical theory as a term came to be is through the Frankfurt School. And the word critical was an addition to theory in a way that was put there to basically first refer to Marxism. In other words, critical theory was just a way to say Marxism without having to say Marxism. But also, why was it that? Well, because there's theory that tries to understand and explain what is, and then there's theory that tries to discover what is implied or what is missing from what is, or the in a dialectical way. There's kind of negative theory. So that's what makes critical theory critical, is because it doesn't accept that what is simply is, but rather tries to include the possibility for change,
right?
And even the necessity for change, which itself may be an aspect of what is. So that's what makes it Marxist. But then critical theory, as a broad academic subject, has come to be almost anything that's associated with the continental philosophical tradition, I think. So you'll get Hannah Arendt and Heidegger and Foucault, Hegel, Kant, and a variety of other people thrown in under the label critical theory. And it's generally is, as you said, as my experience has been, that critical theory is taught through communications departments or literature departments rather than philosophy departments. And I came out of, I had an undergrad degree in philosophy. So the idea of critical theory, when I first picked it up, when I was starting podcasting and decided I wanted to return to philosophy in a way, I did that by just kind of rediscovering critical theory and seeing how it connected to like, 19th and 20th century philosophy, really, the worldly philosophers
Yeah.
and so forth. So, but I never did put the word theory in any of the branding for my podcast or even for Zero Books. Maybe it was mentioned if for like Zero Books was a critical theory imprint. I think that's what we said, but I wouldn't have just said theory by itself, although I might as well have, because in certain circles, when you say theory, you mean critical theory. And when people mean critical theory, and like when Noam Chomsky would critique theory, he was critiquing postmodernism, the continental tradition, people like
Right.
Lacan and so forth. So, but I think it's important to distinguish the varieties of philosophical positions that emerged in the 20th century from critical theory, which is really kind of Marxism. And I wouldn't include post-Marxists under the label critical theory myself. But on the other hand, I don't get to decide how people use terms, and it's pretty common now for critical theory to include a wide swath of 20th century and 21st century thinking, a lot of it having very little to do or being explicitly anti-Marxist. So, but I was kind of wondering if the theory and theory underground for you was a way to hold on to Marxism or not.
No, it's definitely not. Though, of course, we do have Marxists who are members and post-Marxists. But I know that there are people at TU who are less interested in the whole Marx, post-Marx kind of side of things, or and for most people who are post-Marx, there's also some kind of, shared fraternity with Marxists against rad libs or against anarchists, like you and I being against Bill Ayers, that kind of thing. But then it's like the different kinds of burnout lead to different kinds of theory, I think, because theory is often a reflective activity. Now, that's the danger, is that it becomes purely reflective, as opposed to you're reflecting and then acting, reflecting and then acting, experiment, trial and error. So I'm not for theory for theory's own sake, though I think there are people at Theory Underground who really are just trying to get into ideas and thinking about things for the first time, and they're not really politically activated. And so you do have people who are reading Husserl or Heidegger or Hegel, the three H's John Searle said, don't read the three H's, and I think Chomsky kind of agrees with that, right? And then Zizek would be the opposite, as someone who's popular, who obviously has read those three H's. He was a Heideggerian at one point. He's a Hegelian now. Of course, we could say that his Hegelianism is a sort of crypto-Heideggerianism, controversial. It's, the more likely thing is to say that it's a Lacanian Hegel. But I'm not a big Hegel guy personally. Though I like him, the preface to the Phenomenology of Spirits, like one of the best things ever written. But the reason I like the Heidegger, Arendt, Foucault, though that, Foucault especially, not my favorite, but the reason I like what these authors bring to the table is that the part of me that resonates the strongest with Marx, and I think this is a fantasy, so it's like, we could kind of critique it as a daydream, but I like this image of Marx at the British Museum in the reading room. I tried to actually go to that reading room when I was in London, and it was closed. I couldn't get in there, sadly. But, there was a specific chair that he always sat at, and this is when he was working through Ricardo and Smith and just doing political economy and French socialism and German idealism and trying to bring it all together in some kind of imminent critical endeavor. I love that. And he's not just there removed from the world. He's trying to keep up with the times. He's trying to actively theorize like how to harness and influence an actually existing working class movement. And he's doing that because he cares about people having dignified lives. He's doing that because he knows that people their entire horizon of possibilities is foreclosed by capital. So I love that, and I love all of that. I think we can all, probably everyone here can agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
But then what's great about Heidegger is that he's far enough forward in the future after Marx. There's other Marxists actually existing at the same time as Heidegger. Heidegger's probably only really read Lukács as far as actually existing Marxists during the time goes. And he's put off by it because it seems dogmatic. It's very obvious when you read Lukács that bourgeois or bourgeoisie is just being used to mean everything bad that I don't like. Whereas like the proletariat's going to be like Jesus that comes down and saves the day, when there's good reasons to look around and be like, that seems doubtful, especially from the German standpoint at the time, where it seems like the Russians are using this ideology to mobilize workers and soldiers. But what are they really doing? Is it really for something that could get us beyond the worst things about our current situation? Or is it an excuse, a legitimation narrative to invade Poland and rape women and burn priests in their churches? That was a very big concern at the time, right? And so I don't think reactionaries reacting the way that they did to losing World War I and seeing the Eastern menace rise was good. Obviously, I don't like fascism, especially not the Nazi version. That's really bad, right? But the clarity, I think, in a sort of sense that a thinker can have by not sharing some of my fundamental concerns is actually good, right? It's like, I gave you all these reasons that I really like Marx and what he was doing. And I feel very inspired. I'm like, yes, we must create the conditions of possibility for people to be able to do what he did then again, because we actually have to work through the situation anew, right? And so there's bourgeois thinkers who have written after Marx that Marx would be reading in that museum if he was alive today. Theory Underground tries to make the space where it's like Marx might not have all the answers, but doing as Marx did for similar reasons, perhaps, could potentially lead to something good. Worst case scenario, workers with earbuds are going to have a lot of fun. I'm hoping that there's something more to it than that, but worst case scenario, it is fun, to do theory.
Yeah, well, when we first met in Idaho, I remember talking to a bunch of people who were part of that Jordan Peterson conference that were students there, and what I noticed was whoever I spoke to about why they were involved and what they were interested in, they would say to me things like, "Oh, I really like Kierkegaard, or I really like Hegel, or I really like Lacan. I'm a Lacan guy." And and I thought at the time that it was kind of a mistake to I'm hearing an echo.
Are you hearing that too?
Yeah.
Let me see what's going on here, because that's weird. It like glitches out on me. Okay.
Well, let me see. Testing.
I might have.
Are you coming in through your headphones or through a speaker?
You're coming in through my headphones, yeah.
So why am I getting an echo of my own voice?
I think it was something on my voice meter, my virtual soundboard. I think it should work. I think we should be fine.
All right, so we're good. All right. So yeah,
I thought glitching was on my headphones. I thought it was all on my side. Okay.
No, I'm hearing it on my side. So which means that it might be getting
still
put into. No, I'm not hearing it anymore. I was hearing it on my side. I wonder if that means that it was going to be on my audio track, but I doubt it, but we'll see. Anyhow, so let me go back. When I would talk to people at the University of Idaho, that's where it was, right?
Boise State, yeah.
Boise State, yeah. At Boise State. When I was talking to people at Boise State, they would say, I like Kierkegaard. I remember particularly somebody told me they liked Kierkegaard, or they liked Lacan, or they were fans of Heidegger or Foucault or Marx. And I always thought at the time, and my response was at the time sort of a rigid rationalist response, which was, I don't know why you like these things, and I'm not sure why I should care what you like. If you told me I like Michael Jackson or I like pistachio ice cream, I would say, oh, okay, well, maybe I'll like those things too. But it does seem to be that it reduces things to the level of taste, almost.
Yep.
But doesn't quite. It depends on the context in which you say it, right? And you say you like it because it is aligned with your political aims, right? For me, though, the reason I came to like Marx, and I did come to like Marx, but to say I liked him is sort of a mistake. The reason I came to agree with Marx, be convinced by Marx, decide I wanted to align myself with some possible Marxist politics, was because I had a particular question I was trying to find an answer to something I wanted to understand, which was, why did the global economy go into economic crisis, and what would the consequence of it be? And I had a very narrow question. Yeah. It was not that I was not a Marxist until after 2008. I was an anarchist before then. And before then, I even went through a period where I was sort of a post-structuralist anarchist. Or I would say I was a surrealist anarchist. I thought of myself as a creative writer more than a political philosopher. I mean, and I still would say that's true. But when it came to my politics, I didn't have a fully formed politics. I had a grab bag of ideologies and ideas that I liked, but I didn't know even what questions I was trying to answer by reading theory, right? So, but when I started to read Marx and study Marxists, I knew what the answer, or at least what the question I was trying to answer was, which was, why did society go into an deep economic crisis, and what will the consequences be for that? And then the answer that led me to Marx, and it also led me to an incomplete understanding of Marx, because I didn't have a political understanding of Marx. I had a economic understanding of Marx, or maybe a political economic understanding of Marx at its best. But so I remained a Marxist, even as the Marxist organization that I was part of failed to be able to adequately meet the moment when Trump was elected and became centrist Democrats in practice, because I thought, well, what I've gotten out of this Marxist group was true when I'm asking the question, why did the economy go into crisis? It's true enough. It's a good answer. And I broadly agree with Marx's conception of how society organizes itself around work. But somehow there's a missing piece here that I still need to explore, which is, why hasn't a Marxist politics been able to emerge independently? How do we get conned into continuing to support progressive capitalism? And I could ask that question in a variety of ways, but that's been since around 2016 what I've been asking, and along the way investigating and even agreeing with, ambivalently agreeing with the Bernie Sanders turn and the potential that failing the right way with Bernie would lead to something more. Right. I thought that was the only argument any real socialist ever gave for supporting Bernie Sanders was, by attempting this, there would be an opening up of other forms of political organizing that would be much closer to socialist organizing, for whatever reasons. The different reasons. Some people thought, well, if we all got universal health care, then workers would have more time, energy, and less precarity. And so they will be able to do independent organizing for their own interests. Others would say, like I did, if we could do damage to the Democratic Party by splitting it, we would have an opportunity to develop an independent political project. But all of it really, for me, hinged on the necessity to overcome what I saw as the permanent contradiction within capitalist society based on labor time mediating our relations, both our productive relations and everything else as a secondary and third effect. So that's why I'm a Marxist, and it's not so much that I'm a Marxist because I have a deep commitment to any particular politics. Although Chris Catrone has been convincing me that the necessity for working class power to gain hold through a party makes sense, and I am certainly willing to throw in with efforts to organize working class institutions that would be independent from the state for a variety of reasons. Some of them civil libertarian, not even Marxist, right? But yeah, so what I wonder is what it is that makes you not convinced by the Marxist explanations and theories of political economy, I guess, or politics, if you prefer to just approach it that way. Because you could decide I'm not a Marxist because while I agree with his critique of capitalism, this is very common in the 90s. Oh, Marx is a great critic of capital. He has a great theory of how capitalism works, but his politics are bad because he's authoritarian. That's what anarchists would say in the 90s. That's what I said in the 90s. Yeah, at a time when I didn't fully even understand Marx's critique of political economy. I hadn't read Capital. I just sort of knew he said, oh, capitalism is bad, which is good, enough for me because I agree capitalism is bad. So that's a good critique of capitalism, right? Anyhow, so I'll let you respond to what I've been kind of aiming to ask you there.
I think the way that you're describing that somebody can start to say that Marx is right more or less about capital, but maybe not politics, or that people will just kind of refer to capital as the bad guy, and without having read Das Kapital. Like the reason that people do this might be because it's like this stack of books that we live in relation to, and everyone's like, oh my God. And when you try to read it, you're like, okay, he's figuring it out. And so like, you're just like, I trust that, he gets it. All right. Like I'm sure it's more or less, on it. And so, a big goal for me is to genuinely work through the 3 volumes in the expansion packs, like Hilferding and Luxemburg, and I mean, even Time, Labor, and Social Domination by Postman, all the way up to, Trans Critique.
Postman.
Postman with Time, Labor.
Yeah,
did I say Postman?
Yeah.
It's because I have like Postman right in front of me.
Yeah, right.
But no, Postone, Time, Labor, Social Domination, and Caratani, with Trans Critique, as well as
I don't know that one.
World History. Oh, you would love him. Yeah, he's a lot of fun. And that's one of the interesting things is he's trying to, Caratani in the Structure of World History is trying to bring back a Marxist theory of basically stages. It's a stage theory approach. But the thing that he's doing is he's trying to show like actually modes of exchange are more of a determining factor for a period of development than mode of production. And it's this whole thing. It's very interesting. I can't sit here and defend it or act like I fully understand it. But I've read enough of it to be like, that's really important. And it seems really cool. It's, if you think about like how David Graeber seems to be doing something interesting in the book Debt, Caratani is basically doing something similar, but way cooler. And it's because it is more Marxist. But the thing that Graeber's doing with, we didn't really understand how debt works. We didn't really understand about how symbolic exchange works and gift economies. We didn't really understand, all of this. Graeber kind of goes there. Karatani's like, yeah, that's all true. And actually, that does change the priority around a bit. Because if you think about non-capitalist societies, what's determining them at the foundational level is a mode of exchange. And so, he'll give different examples, but, examples being like the gift economy versus the, what you're exchanging is actually a part of the product of your labor for protection, not for exchange value, but for protection. This is a different kind of exchange, right? If we're talking about the rise of what eventually became these great monarchies. So anyway, Karatani is really cool for that. I think he's a Japanese or Korean thinker. I'm not sure. But, my point was simply that Das Kapital is this huge project, and then there's all these expansion packs. And I always feel the need to go back to the beginning and spend more time on it. And then by the time I'm like reading through, volume 2, I'm like, I got to go back to volume 1. But in reality, I go back to Being and Time. In reality, I go to Totality and Infinity. In reality, I go to Classification, Struggles, Habitus of Field, other works by Bourdieu. And so, maybe it's ADHD, but also I'm juggling a lot of different things. And part of what I'm trying to experiment with here in as a process of research is, what does it mean to be a worker with earbuds, reclaiming a mind from both work and, for most people, being schooled in a schooling system that makes people feel like books are these things that you have to read from front to back, and there's going to be a book report or an exam at the end of it. And then it, because you can regurgitate it. As opposed to like, the extreme opposite of that approach would be more like Machiavelli. Machiavelli, when he walks in, he says that he walks into his house after a long day's work and he takes off his muddy boots. You know this quote?
No.
Oh,
I'm not big into Machiavelli.
Oh, well, I had a professor who was.
I just didn't study. I've never really studied Machiavelli. My feeling is, I know about The Prince. I read some of that when I was in college.
Right.
And I'm just like, I don't see, as a socialist, why I need to study how to be a prince. but right, that's probably very Philistine of me. But that's sort of my feeling about Machiavelli.
There's so many interesting things going on with that guy, and I don't really understand him that well. But what I'll say about it, though, is that I had a professor who taught political philosophy, focusing on Plato, Aristotle, Machiavelli, Hobbes, all the way through Marx, and we even read Adam Smith and Ayn Rand in that class. It was really cool. But part of how this professor would teach is with these anecdotes, and I don't know if most of them are true. Like he said that Hobbes lived in a tower and ate tar out of a barrel and hated humanity. Like, I don't think that's true. But this professor was just sensational and funny, and it made it memorable so that it sticks in your head. Mm-hmm. So, but with that though, this is true, or at least this is what Machiavelli wrote. He said, "When evening comes, I return home and go into my study. On the threshold, I strip off my muddy, sweaty workday clothes and put on the robes of court and palace. And in this graver dress, I enter the antique courts of the ancients and am welcomed by them." And this is paraphrased, but like the basic, and I'm saying this is the extreme opposite to reading a book to get the grade or because you feel some kind of pressure to be an intellectual, right? It's more of I get an opportunity to really think through the current issues, but instead of just with my buds at the bar or at the coffee shop or on a hike, instead, I get to think through these serious issues with some of the greatest minds that have ever lived, right? And that doesn't mean that they can speak to our times in a copy-paste way, but it means that they might have something to say. And so what happens when you put Marx, Heidegger, Levinas, Bourdieu, Baudrillard, Adorno at the table and then talk about what's going on right now? I'm interested in that. And I think that Marx would be interested in that. I think that Marx would actually read these guys. And I think that in the way that he read Ricardo and Smith and the anarchists, and he's reading the people who have something really important to contribute that nobody else is offering, right? Like some deep insight into the situation. And you'll have people come along and be like, well, how do you pick? You know, and I can't answer these things, right? But there are thinkers that I think are really important. And I can talk about why I like a thinker. And the thing is for me, I hate that language of why I like a thinker. This going back to your setup there. I want to focus more on the political stuff, the Bernie burnout, the Marxism, the political Marxism. But just to say really quick, people do treat theory like they're at a buffet or they're at a shopping mall, and they're thinking, what does this say? And they're thinking, what does this say about me?
Right.
And so it becomes a brand consumerism thing, right?
Right. I mean, look, when you describe what Machiavelli, how he approached reading the classics, right, the great works, as a way to be in conversation with the greatest minds in history, I feel as though that is the right way to approach reading the classics, no matter what you're picking up, whether it's Plato or Lukács, let's say. You know, maybe you don't have to decide where they fit in the pantheon on a scale of 1 to 10 before you pay them enough respect to actually pay attention to what they're saying. But on the other hand, what I've noticed in my autodidactic approach to self-education since I got out of got my undergraduate degree way back in the 90s, is that it often is the case that before you can truly engage in a conversation with one of the greats, you have to catch up to them. The example for me, the primary example is I read Guy Debord when I was like 22 or something, and I had no context for his work. So I was reading him critique Nietzsche without ever having read Nietzsche or read any other critiques of Nietzsche or understanding how he was, who Nietzsche was or what his arguments were. So, or I would be reading quotes from Hegel without really understanding why he was quoting Hegel, why Hegel and not Plato. I didn't even know, right? So what I worry about is when we think in this terms of having a conversation with the greats, we might end up a little bit like, have you ever seen the movie The King of Comedy?
No.
The King of Comedy, I know I'm old, but 1982 is a classic and influenced the movie Joker. There are lots of references to The King of Comedy in Joker. Okay. And in that, there's a character named Rupert Pupkin who lives in his mother's basement. And he has these cardboard cutouts of celebrities all throughout his basement. And he's created an audience for himself out of cardboard cutouts. And he pretends that he's on television or part of this scene or at a cocktail party with great celebrities, and kind of develops his own fantasy life for himself and ends up kidnapping a character who's basically Johnny Carson and forcing his way onto the Tonight Show. And succeeds. Oh. He becomes a celebrity, but it's a Martin Scorsese picture worth watching. And so I worry that what we miss out on when we approach these thinkers as if they're people we can just have a conversation with is the fact that we may not actually be ready to fully understand what's being said to us, and we could probably use some expert guidance from professors who spent years and years reading these texts and having our understanding of them evaluated. I mean, as a former anarchist, I hate to say that kind of thing, but I do think it's true.
You're opening up like several problems, but the two biggest problems that I hope everybody takes really seriously, especially workers with earbuds, is this problem of auto-didacticism. I mean, maybe you've been talking to Benjamin about this because Benjamin and I have been talking about this. And at this point, we're Eskimo brothers. Is that how this works? So it's like I think that's the saying. I know it's offensive for some people that you say,
well, are Eskimo kisses? No, that's butterfly kisses where you take your eyelashes and rub them up against someone's cheek. That's
Sorry.
Butterfly kiss. Well. Did I cut out?
I just realized what my problem was. Hold on, I have to restart my headphones. Sorry.
What is an
God.
Eskimo brother? Can you hear me?
Okay.
Oh,
well,
now
you're
I'm on
coming out the wrong-
speakers.
Yeah, you're coming out the wrong. Hold on. Sorry about this.
No trouble.
I'm back. All right. Autodidacts, workers with earbuds,
Hmm.
Benjamin Studebaker. I was doing this little like, oh, is it not politically correct to say Eskimo? I'm so sorry. It's also like, that's people. I think in the 90s, like we used to say, well, I was a kid, but maybe in the early 2000s, I think that it was saying like, if you got with somebody that somebody else got with, then you're both like Eskimo
Oh
brothers.
God, that is
You
so
didn't know
gross.
that?
That is so. You're
Yeah,
talking
it's
about
messed up.
sloppy
So
seconds. You're talking about sloppy seconds.
yeah,
Is what you're talking about.
yeah.
All right. So you're
Yeah.
Eskimo brothers with
Yeah.
who?
Well,
We're not Eskimo
Benjamin.
brothers, okay? Oh, who?
With
Yeah,
Benjamin.
who of
Yeah.
you?
It's an analogy. Okay.
Oh, you and I are Eskimo brothers because of Benjamin Studebaker. Listen, leave your fantasies out of my head. All right.
Yeah. Well, let's say, okay. Autodidacts, workers with earbuds.
Look, I am a worker with.
There's
earbuds.
problems with them. Yes, you are.
Well, I am. I got into podcasting and rediscovered philosophy and trying to read about Marxism because I got an iPod from my sales manager for winning a contest when I was at Comcast working in sales. And I started listening to podcasts going back and forth from work and listened to a guy named KMO on a podcast called The C Realm. And then I also listened to a bunch of other podcasts, including like Alex Jones. I would listen to that because it was so long. It could get me all the way to work and back again. And so I was a worker with earbuds, and it did lead me to some kind of political activity. So I don't discredit the notion.
No, I don't but I would say like when I first started listening to like it was Joe Rogan, but I also started listening to audiobooks that were like into, new age spirituality. And also I got a little into the conspiracy universe. And I think that when you're a worker with earbuds who has officially maxed out the amount of music that you can listen to, at some point you run out of music. You just like, for some reason, you just like need something more. And you're like, oh, podcasts, that's a thing. So you start looking into it. And at some point you go, if you're like me, you want something more. And so if podcasters will mention a book, then you'll actually, check it out if you can. It's a lot easier to do nowadays with like Anna's Archive PDF to, something like Speechify or Natural Readers. And then you can listen to the robot reader when working. Of course, a lot of people hate that, but if you're desperate and you really want to listen to that book, you can figure it out. Also LibriVox and Audible and that stuff's amazing. But I was listening to kind of just whatever podcasters would reference. I had no orientation. I was getting into conspirituality. It causes you to spiral because you start taking every little every little coincidence that you see, you take it as confirmation that you're wise or that God is showing you something or that the law of attraction is working or, that kind of, I had friends that were in this and it just, it becomes a thing and people spiral out on it. And I definitely spiraled out on it. Mm-hmm. And because it resulted in my life kind of going to crap, I had to kind of, I was forced to get a little humbled about it. And I was thinking about like how embarrassing it was. And that's when I was like, there's no future for me working these dead end jobs anymore. What am I going to do? And I was like, well, someone told me, well, Dave, because they were coaching me through my depression. They're like, you should just look into the Pell Grant. It's accessible. You could go to college. And I was just like, oh, there's nothing for me there. Like, they're just going to brainwash me. And they were like, well, but yeah, you could study whatever you want. And the Pell Grant will pay for most of it, which was a lie. And I ended up going into tons of debt. But I kind of did it as a desperate measure. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But it wouldn't have been interesting to me had not been for the podcast pipeline, really. So it's like, mm-hmm. I owe a lot to Joe Rogan in that sense, because Joe Rogan would bring on people who were some kind of professor, some kind of intellectual sometimes. And I was like, wow, this person's got all kinds of ideas. kind of like things that I've thought before, but way deeper. And that was the big moment, was realizing, oh, so I didn't want to read nonfiction because I loved having my own ideas, but listening to intellectuals talk, I was like, oh, so these aren't my own ideas. Other people have had this thought, but way further than I have. And so that's where I started to realize, like, I probably just sound like a dumb echo of other stuff going on. And so that made me more curious about the history of ideas, you know. But all of that to say, autodidacts do need some kind of structure. They do need some kind of supervision. They do need lecturers. And that's what I feel called to do as an educationist. You know what I mean? I'm not a professor.
An educationist. Just an educator. You're an educator. You're an educator. You don't have to invent a new word. I'm learning my dad.
Neil Postman calls himself an educationist, and I like it. So it's like,
oh, really? Oh, why does he call himself an educationist?
He's just trying to use a term to really drive home the point that he's not an ideologue, that he's not going into the classroom to say, hey guys, this is what you need to know. This is how you need to see it. He's trying to, but he goes beyond that. It's also about the structure of a person's life. And what does the working class school really teach people? Well, it doesn't really teach people math and English and history. It teaches people a certain kind of anxiety and way of performing for an arbitrary authority figure for 1/3 of your life when you're not watching TV or sleeping during the other 2/3 of your life. That's what Postman would say, right? Just to give you a short version.
Yeah,
and I like that, you know.
I've read that book, but it's been a long time. When did it come out? Like in the late 80s?
Oh, Abusing Yourself to Death?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be in the 80s. Yeah, I actually just got back from campus talking to some people about it. It's a great book. But the other issue you brought up with the autodidact crisis, which I think right now we have a lot of people spiraling out, they become, and this is the conversation I've been having with Benjamin, and we're going to do an episode on this soon, but they become self-hating while at the same time prideful, and then caught up in a death loop. And I would then add, in the post-class fractured mass, when people are so isolated, the people who need community and love the most are often the people turning to theory because things aren't working out for them. And instead of it making it so that they can connect with other people who have something going on in their life, they end up only connecting with people who are into theory or into the niche video games they play or whatever it is, the bullshit they consume from their phone. So it's the worst thing about theory is probably that it can make it so that you get more and more and more niche. And of course, you know, a person saying, I'm a Lacanian or I'm a board, you know, whatever it is, that's fucking niche, man. Like, that's really, really niche. You're so niche now, you're not going to be able to have a real conversation with anyone else ever again without them just going, what the hell are you talking about? Right. And so that there's the losing touch with other people and kind of you're burning bridges without even realizing it effect. You know, you're being isolated, and Judith Sklar in her book, the Ordinary Vices, she says that the number one trap for intellectuals is misanthropy, which is the hatred of humanity. It's the number one thing, because you start to go, oh, if people would, you know, Bourdieu says this, if you would just be like me, if you would just, if an intellectual like me was inside of your body and you had the ideas that I have, your problems would go away. But, oh, nobody listens to me because I'm smart, but they don't want to listen to me. And so you become like, you start to hate people. You're like, these people are all idiots, right? And so this is a struggle. This is a struggle for most people in the world of theory. And so this is a lot of factors all kind of compounding at the same time that we have the imposter syndrome and anxiety because there's so much to read. And so what you're talking about here is like, oh my God, I have to go back and read Plato now too. Then I have to read Aristotle. Then I have to, right now I feel bad about the fact that I haven't read Augustine and Aquinas, because Benjamin is making me realize I've not taken seriously the Middle Ages. You know what I mean? Like I act like the medievals are just like the guys from Monty Python, And I'm just like, ha ha ha, who cares? We don't live in that world anymore. And Benjamin's like, you'd be surprised. And so, the course that he's teaching right now, it's bringing a whole new kind of perspective and structure to the history of ideas. I've had other political philosophy professors, thankfully, and that's something I have that most people don't. And so, what about the people who know better than to go $60,000 into debt? Like, I mean, I didn't know any better, it was kind of a trap. I was desperate.
Mhm.
And I also got addicted to this stuff. I was like, well, this makes life kind of worth living, So yeah, no, I think you're right. You're right on the money that these are like the knot of problems, and that as soon as a person's like, oh, I want to change the world, and then someone's like, oh, okay, well then you got to read Marx, and then they start trying to read Marx, and they're like, oh, now I got to read Ricardo and Bakunin, and they start spiraling out too, and it's like, how much of that's really necessary? And there's this part of me that wants to say no one should have to do this at all, but then there's this part of me that's like, well, but I think people like me need somewhere to go. Like people like me do need this because, and I don't like the bringing personal stuff in too much, but yeah, like I was the only kid in a big family that was constantly getting in trouble, and it always came back to, if I don't understand why the rule exists, I just won't respect it. And I was growing up in a big family where it's like, the answer to my question why was always just because. And so it's like, that would mean that I was a natural kind of critical little philosopher kid, and guess what? I got my stripes. I got in trouble every day, like multiple times. I was literally the problem child because I'm like, no, I just cannot respect being told something just because.
Right. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, gosh, I relate to almost everything you're talking about, right? I have had imposter syndrome, certainly. There's many books that I've not read, or books that I've read and then forgotten. At 54, that's happening. First of all, I'm going to try to break the habit of mentioning my age because I don't like it when other people do it. So I'm going to try to break it. But the point is, I relate to what you're saying. Right.
How old are you? Wait, sorry.
I'm 54. What were you going to ask me?
Okay, so you're like 14, 15, 16, 17. Okay, like 17 years older than me. Okay, cool.
Yeah. No, it's great. You have a lot to look forward to. So here's what I want to say to you though about this is how I've tried to solve some of the problems. If you try to just recall what you are, what your motivation is to do the reading, rather than, because like I said, like the Rupert Pupkin approach is to attempt to elevate your sense of yourself by surrounding yourself by the greats. And if you instead start from the position of like, I am the product of my society and therefore I am good enough to critique it. There's an old punk rock song from the Dead Kennedys, Dead Milkmen. Anyway, where it's called Institutionalized, and they're telling him, you have a problem. You need to, you know what the song I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's a great song.
Yeah. And he's like, why do I have to go to your schools and talk to your therapists and work by your rules? And yet I have a problem. So, but anyway, if you just try to say like, I am the product of all this, and I have every right to critique it, and I also have the right to decide what I think is the question that I should be trying to answer, and set off on a course to answer it while still remaining open enough to have the even questioned. I think you'll be all right. But the trouble is just how insecure and precarious people feel. And I think this gets to the post-class fractured mass part of the equation, because without a collective project that people are engaged with, a sort of consensus emerging in society amongst autodidactics and professors and so on, You're just left to do everything yourself.
It isolates you, right?
Yeah, you're isolated, and
Just
and now
isolates you.
you don't even have, you have to decide who to decide to trust. You don't have a community of trust to work within. So you have to decide who to trust, even to formulate your questions, let alone the answers, right? So that's tricky. And that is why with the campaign for socialism, the aim is to actually go into society amongst everyday people and discover what questions they're asking that are immediately relevant to them, rather than deciding in advance, okay, we're going to try to solve all these problems by figuring out the right theory and the right questions independently of society, which almost inevitably leads you to align with the state, which is the institution which it takes a position independent of society to manage it. So yeah, that's why the campaign is going in that direction. But I do understand how autodidacticism and a kind of alternative form of education is emerging, especially now.
You cut out. I think these headphones are breaking, man. I'm so sorry, Doug. I wasn't able to pick up on the last.
Can you hear me now?
I heard that. You said something about Mao at the end of that.
I said nothing about Mao. I said, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, okay. I can hear you now. Okay.
Okay, good. All right.
Well, I don't know what's going on though.
Well, we're almost at a full hour, so maybe you can adjust your headphones and we can do a second half in just a minute. But what I will say is that I basically believe that we need to reconnect to each other in society, and I think you're doing that. And that the theory, while interesting, and while it can bring people together, may be less important than just the action of getting together to try to work together on solving social problems and political problems independently, without having a particular ideology or theoretical orientation at the start. Certainly that's what the campaign is doing, even though there's also a commitment to socialism driving that. So actually in the second half, maybe we should talk about socialism and whether or not we can be justified in a belief in socialism today or not. So would that be worthwhile to explore in the second half?
Yeah, something on why not socialism or why not the left would be probably clarifying for people who are seeing us agree too much. I also don't do this dogmatically. I'm not saying like it shouldn't be the left or it shouldn't be socialism. I'm not Bennett cryptofascist or whatever. You know, I'm not saying that. But we've had enough conversations at this point. I think you have a bit more of a sense where I'm coming from. It's like I don't want to hitch my wagon to any signifier that makes my parents think that I'm coming for their property, or that I'm going to scapegoat them because they like Trump, or that my sister who's pro-life is not going to she's going to have people at some bureau deciding she gets fewer food rations and has to work more, or gets exiled because she has the wrong opinion about like what a woman is. I'm sorry, man. Like that shit's crazy. And you agree on the civil libertarian stuff. It's like that's like complete like a dead end. And obviously the right wing does a great job ruining everything for the left wing by highlighting or signal boosting the worst tendencies of the American left. But also, I mean, I've just been to very few places where it seems like the American left is doing itself any favors. And so they're saying that you're committed to this idea of working class self-defense and organizing and potentially revolution or whatever, and the tradition there. and that gives you direction. It gives you even like a way maybe forward with people. But I'd like to get into the reasons why I think that it's more than just the signifier. Like there's a lot of assumptions that go into it that result in people not getting anywhere. But I want to say something, I guess, to close out this side. So we'll leave that be the teaser. Everyone, of course, you should go subscribe to Sublation if you want the juicy bits on the back end there. But what I'm going to say on theory and autodidacts and how they need structure, and also somehow have to stop hating themselves and being so prideful at the same time, because it's not going to go anywhere. Otherwise, not anywhere good. On that, you also brought it to the question of like, but why are you doing it? Are you doing it just to elevate yourself? And for me, one of the biggest problems with the way that theory and philosophy tends to get taught is, look, it's in part got to be about the examined life and actually a love of wisdom. And you're not going to get that if you're treating thinkers or their ideas like it's just you're looking for what's convenient for what you already like, right? That's called confirmation bias, right? Like philosophy can be a lot of things. It can be the critique of doxa or common sense or ideology, all kind of the same thing, right? It could be the critique of those things, though they're all different. But it could be the critique of those things. It could also be the love of wisdom. It could be the history of ideas. It could blah, blah, blah. But there's also, I think, oh God, am I losing my thought here? So no, but with philosophy,
happened to me. I am so happy to see it happen to you, Dave. You have no idea how pleased I am.
Yeah,
because
I never do that. I never do that. Yeah. Oh my God.
Because I always think, oh, my God, it's breaking. See, you got it. Damn, because I wouldn't have gotten it yet.
Go ahead. So one of the biggest things I think is self-criticism, not in the Maoist sense, but in the sense of realizing you don't know what you don't know, and like that the sort of humility that is supposed to come from that. But more importantly, like taking your most precious ideas to task and actually seeking out disagreement, seeking out people who will challenge it, not so you can debate lord over them, but because we are humans, we're flawed. We have this tendency to seek out convenient, comforting, or maybe jouissance-inducing types of stories, narratives, or ideas, right? And so whenever someone starts talking about something and I'm like, oh, well, isn't that convenient? To me, it basically discredits their position unless they can show that they've really spent a lot of time taking themselves to task for going with something convenient. Right. So MMT people would be a great example of people on the left who go for the most fucking convenient thing ever. It's like, oh, well, isn't that a convenient position for you? We could just print money and everybody's wrong. Wow. Why didn't any politicians ever think of that one? Right. It's too convenient. And then they just want to argue definitions and say you don't really understand. And it's like, okay, well, that's really convenient for you, but you don't actually have to think seriously about things now, do you? Same with UBI, same with full automation. So full automation, UBI, and this sort of MMT, we can just print money ideas. It's like, is there anything more convenient? Because obviously every politician has to like talk about the budget. And so as soon as human beings in your life start expressing any kind of concern like that, you just roll your eyes and go, let me give you some definitions for how things work and why we can actually just print money. But it's actually a Mott and Bailey, and that's what this is all Studebaker's. He can do that, much better than I can. He's thought this one through a lot more. But for me, Benjamin's got much more rigorous reasons for this because he thinks a lot more about this issue. For me, I just never took it seriously because I was like, isn't that convenient? Right. And so I thought it would be fun to call out Swolitariat on your channel and just say, Swole, or actually one time, like, come on, guys, why do you guys go for like the most convenient thing in the world? MMT is the most convenient thing. You guys have to show that you not only understand it, but also why nobody else takes it seriously. If you're going to try to like push it.
My problem with MMT is that I have a basic Marxist conception of what money is, which is that it's a commodity that gets its value ultimately from labor time, and it connecting to that puts us back on the gold standard in a way, but not really. But that
Right.
gold is the commodity that can represent all the other commodities, and
it's the most efficient measure of socially necessary labor time.
Right. Yeah. So once you hold that money is a commodity, then you can't just print an infinite amount of it without it having consequences, because the amount of labor time that it represents will reduce down to nothing that way. It won't really be able to serve as money very conveniently. But then once I say that, then we've been off the gold standard for a long time with just exactly what is money's relationship to gold now or to commodities. How does contemporary economies work? And there are stacks and stacks of pro-capitalist and even so-called socialist explanations for all these things. And I don't have an infinite amount of time. I just, at the beginning, reject how I understand MMT to conceive of money. And I just, because of that, I'm not interested in pursuing the topic any further. But
yes,
I would have someone who wants to advocate for MMT on if I felt like it was a politically dominant strain on the left that was relevant because it was going to influence policy in the future. It is not.
Right. Yeah.
It is not. MMT, that whole approach is no longer on the table. And to cling to it, I think, is a way to cling to the neoliberal order, actually. But this debate, that kind of debate, is to me not the most interesting debate to have. I'd much rather debate right now in this moment what it means to just be on the left. Why should we want to change society at all, or why do we want to change society in order to make it more free rather than to discover the right traditional approach to organizing society? Because that's a conservative approach, right? It's like we want to return to traditions. We want to get aligned with how things should be, rather than we want to expand the realm of freedom to develop new ways to be together in society. So why choose a left liberal approach as opposed to a right conservative approach? And that's where I think we're at this moment, much more than MMT
it is
whatever. Yeah.
No, neither left nor right versus some kind of left is, and that's the conversation we're ultimately going to have on the other side of the wall here. So folks coming over to join us, looking forward to seeing you over there. But can I say something about this and just use it as a way of closing up the threads of what we've talked about here with autodidacts becoming so isolated? And so for people who haven't seen Doug and myself talking about the PCFM on why left, or when I did this with Catrone, or when I brought it up and it called it the potato class fractured mass at the panel we did at the convention a few weeks ago. The PCFM does not mean post-class in like a Graeber sense. We're talking, we're post the efficacy of saying that there are two classes specifically growing. They're going to become, it'll be all, this shrinking bourgeoisie versus this giant proletariat. And it's saying instead, well, there's a lot of other ways that development in the 20th century makes that not an efficacious way of approaching it anymore, because you want to work with what's in front of us, right? And when I look out the window, I don't see Charles Dickens like proletariats. I see 21st century Americans, consumers, first of all, And of course, from a third worldist standpoint, they'd just say, oh, well, we're all like labor aristocracy, especially if you're white. I don't buy into that. But what I am saying is that we have to think about the situation. And so we're trying to go deeper into that. And the fractured mass part is pretty obvious. But there are three essential mechanisms to the PCFM. People will go around using this term without really drilling into the mechanisms. And so I do have a lecture up where I get into the mechanisms of the PCFM, the ones that I think that especially Marxists did not study or center in the 20th century, whereas someone like Heidegger or McLuhan or Bourdieu, or, I've got all these other thinkers who are thinking about other aspects of what's going on that often will get bracketed out by by the Marxists' emphasis on the things that they will prioritize. And that's, it's great to have people who have a disciplined, principled approach to prioritizing certain things so that they're able to see stuff that no one else will be able to see. So it's true of Marxists. I'm a pluralist in that sense. I think that there are other people who are going to bring something important to those of us who are not just doing theory for edification, but are also actually trying to be theorists. We're actively theorizing on the ground. And that's where I want to bring it back to. Doing this work on the ground like you're doing, you're getting people to leave their houses, Doug. And so that's something that I want to applaud you for doing, because do you want a bunch of people in the chat who've got Cheeto dust all over their shirts and they haven't seen the sunlight in the last 3 days because they've been playing too much World of Warcraft, right? No, you look great. You look great. Being a parent actually helps, but also parents can get, because they're so exhausted, video gaming is pretty much the only thing that they can do. And that's a heartbreaking scenario. So why theory though? And how do you do theory without becoming so isolated? And I don't think that you should be finding community with other people who do theory. People who do, in a sort of meta sense, that's still possible. But how does the theory community that you're a part of get you back out in the world without making you hate humanity, and make it so you can actually build bridges with people who see things very different from yourself? So that's why I'm applauding you, Doug. But what I'm doing is the Agora in Sarutu, as well as a bunch of other organizational concepts. But I'll just say that the Agora is a kind of space where there's different versions of what this might achieve, but at the most humble level, it's about learning to talk to people who don't have your prior understanding, and learning to talk to people who are not in your niches. And so it's not a real Agora event unless it's set up somewhere public where people are walking by in real life, but it's also being live streamed. So the idea is that you're learning how to speak on the internet and to random passersby at the same time. And you're not doing it as a street preacher. It's more like what we do is we have a canopy with lights and it's all electronic. And we have like a sort of podium set up with some chairs and microphones. So people see it's a venue. There's a thing going on. And when they're walking by, they might stop and listen in for a little bit and go, well, that's interesting. Scan the QR code. Now they're listening to the live version while they're walking away. So that's the Agora. It's an organizational concept that we've been experimenting with for the last few months. And it's been being theorized for the last few years. Sarutu, on the other hand, is very different. Instead of trying to speak to the interstices between the niches, like the Agora, Sarutu is about doing socioanalysis and alien anthropology. So that's what this stands for: Socioanalysis and Alien Anthropology Research Unit at Theory Underground. And so it's less like doing it for the sake of socialism, though some people involved do see it that way. And it's more about assume that we don't actually know what society is or how culture works right now. Assume that in the PCFM, we are much more different in some ways than we imagine. We tend to see similarity or superficial differences, but the point here, so I didn't know about the movie The King of Comedy, right? When you referenced it earlier today, I was talking to some students. They haven't seen Anchorman, and I'm just like, well, man, how are we even supposed to have a conversation? I wanted to make a really quick aside so that you knew what I was talking about. It was to be an analogy, and now we can't even do that. And that's how people, obviously, who read Shakespeare and Homer and the King James Bible feel. Like they don't have any shared reference points with people in this world. And so sociology and anthropology being separated from one another is a reification. It's a reification of the relations of production. You're talking about those people over there versus people like us. Sociology is done on people like us. Anthropology is done on the other. So the idea of alien anthropology is your next door neighbor is an alien. And to them, you are an alien. So what does it mean to communicate with them kind of on that basis? The socioanalysis part, I'm not going to get too much into it. It's not the same as psychoanalysis. I have introductory lectures to it on my channel that are pretty recent, actually. But all of this is to say what we're about to do with the second phase of Sarutu, or SAARUTU. What we're about to do is something I'm very excited about. I'd be happy to come back on and talk about how it's going in a few months. But let's just say I don't think anyone's ever done anything quite like it. And it's going to be crazy. But it's going to be good because it's going to get people out there in a way that helps them become a part of communities that just don't align with their ideologies, but they're also going to learn how to stand up for themselves if they have disagreements and not turn it into some like, oh, you disagree. So the final close of why theory then, if it's not, is it just to make yourself sound cool or smart or something like that? And I want to say one thing I do like about socioanalysis as developed by Pierre Bourdieu, though I think TU takes it much further. But one of the things I like about it is that he says that it's like jujitsu, or he says a martial art, but I do jujitsu. And so for me, I'm just like, yeah, it's like jujitsu and Muay Thai. And so he says that sociology can be a martial art. And so the question is like, why should you be studying the martial arts or any martial art? And as a working class person, you need to be able to defend yourself from people who are going to epistemologically gaslight you, which is to say people use fear and belonging to a community and fear of being expelled. They use these things against you to force utterances of belief. And that is something that's a reason why people don't get involved in churches. That's a reason why people leave communities all the time if they're free thinkers. So you need to learn how to stand up for yourself, how to hold your own ground, and still love people through those differences, and realize that this sort of epistemologically gaslighting social blackmail mode that people address us in is something that doesn't have to be the end of it. We can actually just go, oh, it's a little jujitsu, boop, 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 boop. I still love you. Let's keep going. And that's the point. Like, that's the main point, I think.
Okay, well, great. Let's talk more in the second half. I want to flash one thing on the screen, advertise something that for diet soap, but it barely exists anymore. I'm bringing this up just out of nostalgia. Here is the third issue of diet soap when it was a zine. This is actually the second iteration of Diet Soap. Diet Soap was the name of the podcast. It still is the name of the podcast.
Yeah. I listened to it. Yeah.
Barely mentioned anymore. But yeah, when I started podcasting, I called the podcast Diet Soap because in the early 90s, I created a zine called Diet Soap. And then again, around 2008, I created the Diet Soap zine again. And I started the podcast to promote the zine. That's what the podcast was for. The zine dropped away after the fourth issue, but the podcast lives on. Here's the cover of the third issue. And I want to point out that the question of how we could be suffering from economic collapse and therefore be facing a class struggle in 2008 was on my mind. And you can see it on the cover. We've got this old photo from the Great Depression in the background, but I've lined up all the apps from your iPhone so that they cover her eyes here. And the point was we had to rethink what class struggle would look like, and without abandoning the fact that it was actually going to be necessary as the economic crisis came in. So and it was like there was something counterintuitive about a class perspective, and also at the time about the notion that we would could be living through something that threatened to be a depression, even as we had this expanded technological wonderland that we're living in. So how can we be getting everything we need from our phones and yet also be suffering from a depression, which we didn't quite reach? But anyway, I wanted to point that out to you just to say that while I appreciate what you're saying about the post-class fractured mass, and your notion of the agora sounds interesting, and like I would like to participate in something like that in the future. I don't quite understand the need to stream it and be in a real space at the same time, other than because it actually, in a digital world, if it isn't online, it doesn't exist. And the last thing about jujitsu, I'm a little concerned about, but I do think there's something to it. I actually would probably endorse it. But we should talk about all of it on the other stream. Yeah, I'll see you in just a minute. I'll send you a link. If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.